So to kick us off, I'd first like to welcome Achim Steiner. Achim was previously the Executive Director of UN Environment and is now Administrator of the UNDP. Just for the avoidance of any doubt, that means he is the boss of the UNDP. Okay, it also means he is an extremely busy man, and so he can't be with us today, unfortunately. But technology allowing, hopefully he is going to join us now with a video link from New York. Achim, I hope you can hear me. I believe it is around 8 p.m. your time, so thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule and for delaying your dinner to speak to us. The stage, Achim, is yours, hopefully. Do we have a link? There. Thank you, Achim.
Malcolm, just to check, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Yes, we can, Achim.
Do you want me to start?
Go.
Okay.
Thank you.
Unless Malcolm jumps back on the stage, I assume you have given me the green light, so let me first of all begin by welcoming you all to this Responsible Business Forum on Sustainable Development 2017 in Singapore. And I can say genuinely, I wish I would actually not be sitting here in New York, but be with you there. But this was not possible, so it's very good to have the opportunity to address you by means of this address. Let me also greet Minister Zulkifli, who, as a dear colleague and also co-host on behalf of the Governor of Singapore, has been part of this project of the Responsible Business Forum. My role this morning is simply to share with you in a few words both the prospect of working with the SDGs in terms of business and the future of the Sustainable Development Agenda and the economies, particularly of the Asia-Pacific region. As many of you in this hall know, it was in 2015 that here in New York in the General Assembly Hall, a rather remarkable thing happened, which is that member states of the United Nations adopted the Agenda 2030 as it has come to be known, and in particular the Sustainable Development Goals that have been woven into the tapestry of this Responsible Business Forum as never before. It is an agenda that I think is going to transform the way we do business in a planetary sense, because it is a universal agenda. For the first time since the founding of the United Nations, we have an agenda on development that does not distinguish countries between North and South, developed and developing, but actually recognizes that what happens in one part of the world has consequences, both good and potentially risky ones, in other parts of the world. We are connected through a planetary and economic, but also a social fabric in a global sense. At the same time, the agenda also gave expression to a series of lessons that we have learned. They were already postulated perhaps 20, 30 years ago, but in Agenda 2030 and the SDGs, they have found very concrete expression. That economic development and progress is premised not only upon a GDP indicator of making that progress happen, but has to be rooted also in a social reality and also an environmental reality. Perhaps one way of describing the SDGs could be, in a simplistic sense, the following three things. It is about reconnecting the economy with society. It is about decoupling the economy from the environmental impacts. And thirdly, it is about leaving no one behind. And particularly the last of these principles speaks to the lessons that we have learned in the last few years across the world, that economics and economies that simply focus on the aggregate or the averages tend to overlook the impacts on people. At some point, societies will begin to react to either poverty being sustained against the backdrop of great wealth, or about marginalization, whether it is geographic, ethnic, religious, or otherwise. We need to accept that our economies cannot only be the playground for those who have found the next breakthrough technology or have the capital that is needed to invest, but must also be an opportunity for the rest of society. It is the social contract of which our societies depend, and I think the rest of the world has a great deal to learn, particularly in the Asia-Pacific region, of what this social contract means in reality. But it is also a recognition that we must reinvent our economies. We need an extraordinary amount of capital to invest in the transformation, be it in terms of, for instance, trying to understand the impact of new technologies. The digital economy, automation, artificial intelligence are all major opportunities, but they need to be transacted in the context of societies that are looking at the future of employment, that are looking at inequality, and that are also looking at how we can decouple our economic progress from the kind of ecological footprint that has created and caused and continues to cause a great deal of harm, including to human health. And I only refer here to the example of pollution. But let me also say that what has been striking in the 2 years since the adoption of the SDGs is something that I think few expected, and that is the interest in the business world and in the financial world, in looking at the future of our economies and societies through a framework of 17 goals that, yes, each one of us might have written slightly differently, but seem to have captured both the complexity and therefore by necessity a more systemic approach to development. And within that development pathway lies also the opportunity for business. The SDGs are a means by which we can look at the future of our markets, at the role of consumers and producers and the relationship between them. We can look at the impact of inequality on the potential future of economic growth, and we can also look at the environmental risks that, left unaddressed, such as climate change, could threaten the very fabric not only of our economies, but indeed of our societies and the world. As you meet in Singapore and are looking at the relevance and the utility of working with the SDGs, I would urge you to look at them, first of all, as a kind of insurance. An insurance to business in looking at the future prospects, be it in terms of investments, technologies, or indeed markets, of understanding what is likely to determine the nature of these markets and the risks that you will face as business, but also the opportunities they create. Secondly, I think we can also look at the SDGs as being areas in which each business can now identify much more clearly where it is actually making a contribution to solving a problem and therefore making a positive contribution to society. But let me take the financial sector in particular, because the greatest challenge we face today, and why we are also sitting together discussing the SDGs, is that we need to mobilize, redirect and attract an unprecedented amount of investments and also capital into these transformational pathways, be it the decoupling of our economies in terms of low carbon footprints, be it in terms of also providing mobility solutions that do not bring our cities to a standstill, create a pollution footprint that is unsustainable, and that allow us to look at the opportunities for including people who may not be able ever to afford to buy a car to become part of a more modern and mobile economy. One of the challenges, and one that is particularly obvious right now when we look at these transformations that we have to go through in the next 20 to 30 years, is that there is a degree of misalignment between where capital is available and where capital is needed and sought after. The SDGs are an enormous opportunity to make a connection here, to also allow us to look at financial markets as an opportunity in the way that they can align with national development priorities. Too often we see that financial resources, particularly in developing countries, either go into very simple and straightforward infrastructure, shopping malls and perhaps housing, which is in itself a positive thing, or they look into the financial markets abroad to maintain their capital investments. The opportunity for domestic financial markets to attract a new form of investment is something that does not only have to do with philanthropy or even with social impact investment. It is the future of our markets, of our economies, and they are transacted through a framework that the SDGs at least can contribute to: one, de-risking, bringing together partners who may traditionally not have met; thirdly, point to areas of need and therefore future markets for the provision of services and technologies that are as of now unmet or will be unmet in the future. And it is against this backdrop that ecosystem of new opportunity that we view ourselves in the United Nations Development Programme as being a key partner. Working in 170 countries with 17,000 staff at the frontier of innovation and some of the most protracted challenges in development, be it poverty eradication, be it the introduction of universal health care, or be it indeed the question of how economies might grow in the future, but if the job growth is zero, then clearly this is not a sustainable path. I hope that in the various streams and workshops that you will be participating in over the session of this Responsible Business Forum, you will find both many illustrations already of how this is happening in reality, and I hope that over the coming years we will, with UNDP, not only be a partner to the governments that are looking at these opportunities and that are using the SDGs to de-risk the future markets for investment, but that we may also be a convener, a catalyst, sometimes also a provider of a pipeline of ready-made investment opportunities that many of you may find not only attractive but actually very promising, not only in terms of a business proposition but also in terms of our common challenge and opportunity, namely sustainable development. I end my brief introductory remarks by first of all thanking the Responsible Business Forum and the Government of Singapore for having brought us together to make this conversation happen. My colleagues are present in Singapore in significant numbers and are ready to engage with you on the role of the United Nations as a partner to governments but also to business and ultimately to our societies. Sustainable development, Agenda 2030, is at the heart not only of the future of the Asia-Pacific region, but indeed of us as a global family. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Achim. You heard what he said. UNDP is a key partner for business, a convener and a catalyst. Plenty of UNDP people representatives here over the course of the 2 days. Hunt them out, find them, talk about that partnership. Now I'd like to invite our second keynote speaker to the stage. From right here in Singapore, so we have him in person, Masagos Zulkifli, who I introduced briefly before, the Minister for the Environment and Water Resources for the Singapore government. Sir, would you like to join me on stage?
Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, a very good morning to all of you. To our foreign friends, a warm welcome. Singapore's hosting of the Responsible Business Forum, RBF, on sustainable development for the 6th time. It's a strong demonstration of the region's commitment to sustainability. Both RBF and the Singapore government are working together towards achieving the Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs, to ensure an equitable and sustainable future for all. I thank the co-organizers, Global Initiatives, and the UNDP for inviting me to highlight Singapore's pledge towards sustainable development. Singapore works closely with our neighbors to improve sustainability outcomes in the region, including those related to climate change, water resource management, and economic growth. Collaboration between countries in the Asia-Pacific region is vital to achieve the SDGs. With RBF focusing on performance and impact this year, I'm glad that both Singapore and her neighbors have made steady progress since the SDGs were launched in 2015. For example, Singapore is coming close to meeting the health-related targets. Asia-Pacific as a whole is on track to meeting the target of zero deforestation, with Laos and Bhutan heading towards an increase in forest cover by 2030. But there are many challenges ahead and some way to go to achieve the SDGs by 2030. While Singapore has made progress on sustainability issues, we remain vulnerable to the impacts of climate change and other threats. Around the world, changing environmental conditions, conflicts, poverty, and disease continue to consume resources and test our capability to respond. We must scale up and accelerate our sustainable development efforts to overcome these challenges. Governments must work in partnership with the UN, private sector, and civil society. And I'm glad that there are representatives from more than 40 countries in this forum. They include CEOs from multinationals, SMEs, and leaders from across the UN system. This wide representation reflects the importance business put on sustainable development partnership across the region. Ladies and gentlemen, governments have to take the lead in setting policies and norms to mitigate the effect of climate change, which are already posing serious threats globally. In recent months, we have seen the devastating effects of storms and typhoons in different parts of the world. Nearer to home, we saw devastating floods in Penang and Da Nang. I urge countries and companies, especially those with global operations, to start thinking about how to deal with the impact of climate change on their businesses and supply chain, and to undertake measures to adapt accordingly. Under the Paris Agreement, Singapore has pledged to lower our emission intensity by 36% from 2005 levels to stabilize our emissions with the aim of peaking around 2030. Climate change is a shared global responsibility. All countries should see through the implementation of the Paris Agreement. Although Singapore only contributes 0.11% of global emissions, we will still play our part as a responsible member of the international community. Singapore published the Climate Action Plan last year, which details our efforts, and one such measure is to work with industry to improve energy efficiency from current levels of 0.6% to 1 to 2% annually. This is the annual energy efficiency improvement rates leading countries like Belgium and Netherlands have been achieving. The future economy will be centered on low carbon and energy efficient growth. Companies can no longer afford to adopt a business as usual approach and to remain competitive internationally. Let me share what we have done. First, Singapore will introduce a carbon tax from 2019 to create a price signal for companies to reduce emissions. The revenue collected from the carbon tax will go into supporting initiatives to transform industry and to encourage them to be more energy efficient. Instead of shying away from this transition towards a carbon-constrained world, I urge companies to start thinking of what it means for their businesses and to adopt measures to stay ahead of the curve. Second, Singapore has invested heavily in clean energy. In fact, clean energy is a key focus area for urban solutions and part of our national sustainability efforts. Among the various renewable energy options, solar energy currently has the greatest potential for wider deployment in Singapore. The government has implemented the Solar Nova program to accelerate solar growth locally and to aggregate solar demand across various agencies. But we know we have limited land area, and we are also therefore deploying floating solar panels on reservoirs to further increase our solar capacity. Third, research. Research is a key aspect in the development of Singapore's clean energy sector. Our research centers such as the Solar Energy Research Institute of Singapore, SERIS, and the Energy Research Institute at NTU, ERIN, are collaborating with industry to support efforts towards large-scale deployment of solar systems. With the combined efforts in improving energy efficiency, reducing emissions, and research into renewable energy, Singapore is on track to meet our commitment under the Paris Agreement. These efforts towards sustainable development require the support and collaboration of all stakeholders. Partnerships are therefore critical. The 3P, or people, private, and public sectors, have to play their parts in encouraging the adoption of sustainable practices, as well as making informed purchasing decisions. In particular, businesses play a key role in the mitigation of global warming. So decisions to invest in research and implementing new energy technologies and energy efficiency measures. Last week, Singtel Group became the first company in Asia, not including Japan, to have its carbon reduction targets approved by the Science Based Targets Initiative. This is a collaboration between CDP, World Resource Institute, Worldwide Fund, and Nature WWF, and the United Nations Global Compact. Their target is an ambitious one, especially when factoring in the expected increase in energy consumption as Singtel expands its network. Singtel Group has also endorsed the new reporting recommendations made by the International Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosures on Climate Change Risk in June this year. I applaud Singtel for taking the lead in corporate responsibility and ask that more companies, big and small, undertake effort to study and publish their carbon footprint. Being transparent is the first and crucial step towards reducing emissions. We also encourage companies to undertake efforts to build operational resilience in the face of climate change. These measures do not necessarily result in a trade-off within the bottom line. On the contrary, we have seen examples where such decisions help businesses stay sustainable and profitable as the world transits to a low-carbon economy. On the global front, Singapore works closely with international partners to exchange knowledge on climate change and green growth. We are also working with other countries to help build capacity. Under our Singapore Cooperation Program, more than 100,000 officials from developing countries have visited Singapore to study key areas such as sustainable development, urban planning, and water management to date. Singapore further joined the NDC partnership in June and has also joined the Ministerial Declaration of Carbon Markets. International market mechanism will play an important role in facilitating enhanced delivery of mitigation contributions under the Paris Agreement. Let me conclude. Governments, businesses, and civil society must work together to achieve the SDGs so as to realize significant and lasting climate action. I encourage all of you to take the opportunity at this forum to think about how your initiatives can help to accelerate action on sustainable development. I hope that you will learn from each other, explore opportunities for further collaboration. I wish you all a fruitful discussion. Thank you.